Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the CS-Sensei. It's Saturday, January 29th, 2022. I got me and Chris here at the moment, but if other people arrive, we will acknowledge them when they get here. But I wanted to get us started as quick as we could because we've got a number of things to talk about, at least 4 that I have in mind. But let's start off with this discussion about least privilege and the separation of duties. Chris, just your basic understanding of why these things are needed. Do you have any thoughts on, we haven't even defined them yet, but why do you think somebody came up with these ideas?
You don't want everybody to be the captain of the ship, or to be the administrator of a system, or to have their hands on everything. You want to only have people who are, the best way I can describe it is people who only get what they need to do their job, and to only get what they need that they know about or have a experience or expertise in it.
Yeah, that's a very important piece to remember. Back when I was working in DoD 20 years ago or so, I remember one of the feds there who had a particular support contract. Back in the day, the support contract was, I need 7 people. You will give me 7 people and they will have skills for system admin, network operations, blah, blah, blah. And they'd say, I want 7 people. Well, we've found, the IT industry have found over time that is a person-dependent particular set of services, and the problem you run into is you can't measure it, you can't monitor it, and therefore you can't improve on it. It's like, I need 7 people. Well, what is improvement? Well, let's make it 6 people and we can all work harder. Well, that's not what it's designed to do. So we've gone from a person-centric to a service-centric support model for IT services, including security. So now you say, we need these services performed this period of time to this extent and at this level of accuracy. We need you to audit, we need, et cetera, et cetera. And then whoever is like responding or bidding tells you how many people it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. So it is far more service-based than it is person-based. So let's move to the least privilege discussion. Oh, by the way, this is part of the CompTIA Security Plus Domain 5.0, Governance, Risk, and Compliance. At least privilege and separation of duties are in there. The other 2 things that we're talking about are not included in this. They're just nice to know type things. So let's talk least privilege. According to the CISA, it says only the minimum necessary rights should be assigned to a subject that requests access to a resource and should be in effect for the shortest duration necessary. In other words, if I am a system administrator for the Exchange servers on this particular enterprise, then I should have the minimum level of access necessary to perform my duties in my current role on those particular servers. But that means that my expertise or my elevated privileges should not extend to other locations, other areas that I'm not responsible for, and should not extend any longer than is needed to do the job that's necessary here. So just remember, it's the rights are only extended when there is a valid requirement and only for the shortest period of time possible. So that's the important thing to remember for least privilege. Now, one of the toughest things that goes on that tends to erode away, I mean, least privilege sounds like a wonderful idea, but then you run into what I call privilege creep. And privilege creep is when you end up with more people having more access for more time than is needed, because you don't you don't automatically think of when this privilege is going to end. So let's say I've got you as an Exchange administrator, and you have Exchange privileges on these Exchange servers, and you're working away merrily, and all of a sudden I bring somebody else in, and I shift you over to the backups and the firewalls. But just in case, I leave you on the Exchange servers. And then over time, I leave, somebody else arrives and looks at the setup and says, well, I've got 2 sets of people with privileges on the Exchange servers. I only need 1. That is what's called privilege creep. In other words, without even trying, you unintentionally increase your vulnerabilities and your opportunity for problems by allowing those privileges to extend beyond what they're supposed to. One of the fastest ways to do this is what's called promotion. If you're at a certain level and then you get promoted, you are supposed to have your privileges changed to that new level and everything below that removed, unless it's part of your current role. What you frequently find, I'm not going to mention names, but what you frequently find is that even somebody who has left a particular role behind and gone somewhere else or gotten promoted or whatever still has those legacy permissions in their previous role that they're no longer performing anymore. So you got to be really careful. If you remember, in our organization, we do mandatory annual recertification of all privileged accounts. And it basically says not you, but your supervisor must certify that you need these particular permissions to accomplish your role within the enterprise. Mandatory recertification for all elevated privileges. So that's how they do it. But again, the problem you run into is frequently known as privilege creep. And it says, number 1, you may forget to remove old privileges. And the person, you, for example, you're now working database servers, and somebody says, oh, wait a minute, didn't Chris used to be an Exchange admin? Oh, hey, Chris, can you fix this for us? Sure can. And you go back and do the work. It's outside your role. It's elevated permissions, and it no longer matches your role anymore. But I find that they tend to keep you there just in case, And what happens if the person who is our SME, who has all the proper permissions, gets hit by a turnip truck? I call it my turnip truck scenario. And they end up in the hospital. Well, what are they going to do? Well, hey, we've got this backup, this ace in the hole, and the issue is that in order to keep you as that ace in a hole, they have to extend your privileges beyond what is considered to be least privilege. And the second one is managers and employees being generous with logins and passwords. In other words, I knew that you had this. I could have said, no, I want this to be removed because of least privilege, but let's just hold on to it for now because you're a good guy. And I know you're not going to do us wrong, and those sorts of things. Well, the problem you run into is you put that into the decision of a supervisor who may or may not understand the security implications at the enterprise level. And they're sort of like, oh, well, this is, and you've heard me say this many, many times. There is always going to be friction between accessibility and vulnerability. Always. I need this. You can't have this because it does this and this and this. How do we get you the access you need at the proper privileges without adding to the vulnerabilities? All you're thinking about is, I need this. I need this. Give me this. And that frequently ends up being the mindset of the managers as well. So just remember that. That's least privilege. And the cousin of least privilege is called separation of duties. And I'm going to read this. This is from NIST.gov. It's a security principle that divides critical functions among different staff members in an attempt to ensure that no one individual has enough information or access privilege to perpetrate damaging fraud. So it's mostly based on fraud, but not always. This was the definition from NIST. So think about it this way. If you are the individual that can commit to designation of funds, let's say, you go pay this person, and then, oh, by the way, you happen to be that person. You know, this has occurred frequently. I watched somebody go to jail for this over at DOD because this person had the ability to award contracts, and amazingly enough, this person's spouse just happened to get an extremely large number of contracts from this particular government group, and somebody finally said, you know what, this is just not right, and did a whistleblower, and sure enough, this person ended up in jail. So just something to think about. I think I have, separation of duties as it relates to security has two primary objectives. The first is the prevention of conflict of interest, real or apparent. Remember, apparent conflict of interest is in itself conflict of interest. It's sort of like, if you remember back in the days, they talked about discrimination. Whether the discrimination was real or perceived, it was treated as real. The same thing with conflict of interest. If it truly occurs or it could occur, then it's considered to be an issue. Good morning, Douglas.
Morning. Hi, everyone.
Morning.
Hi.
Okay, so it talks about wrongful acts, fraud, abuse, and errors. And the second is the detection of control failures that include security breaches, information theft, and circumvention of security controls. You remember we talk about the trusted insider. And you have to be aware that segregation of duties helps to reduce the negative impact if a trusted insider decides to go rogue. Okay? Nobody is going to have a particular, I'm just pull this out, a thumb drive that, if I get fired, I plop this into the thumb drive and say run, and it destroys the enterprise. That is much more difficult to do these days than in the past. Correct segregation of duties is designed to ensure that individuals don't have conflicting responsibilities or are not responsible for reporting on themselves or their superiors. Imagine if you're called to be the auditor, and in your audit you come up with something that you're required to report to your supervisor, but the problem that you find is with your supervisor. You are now in a catch-22 situation. You must report it, but you're reporting to the individual that you have to report to that they're the ones that are guilty of misconduct, or it appears that way. So that's what segregation of duties helps to do. For example, auditors never work for operations. Auditors never work for operations. Auditors are normally segregated. They report separately to a particular group that their only role is to, advise and notify or whatever, but they aren't in the operational role. You should never audit your boss, for example. I'm going to let you guys talk. I'm going to step away for just a minute. Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it reminds me of positions like general inspectors. They don't report to anybody except to Congress, so there's no conflict of interest. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so yeah, that's what that this reminds me of, because you cannot play judge and forgot what the saying, how the saying goes, but something like I don't know. In the Spanish way of saying that you cannot be a judge and a jury at the same time, something like that.
Much better.
Okay.
Hearing you much better. I have
Okay.
conflicting noises.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Scotty, I'm actually interested in if somewhere in the future slides you have something about mandatory vacations.
No, I don't. But that is actually in the Security Plus instructions as well. They do talk about that. There are ways to help address what is called the insider threat. And the insider threat is based on somebody that has privileged access, but you don't know about them yet. And yeah, one of the great examples is you must take leave. You must take a vacation a certain period of time each year. And the reason is, a lot of people back in the day relied on their own skills to keep something running. But if they disappeared, things would start to decay. And that was back in, the late 90s, early 2000s. That was the way you hired IT people. Ooh, I want this person, rather than I want somebody who can perform these services. And yeah, the way to help make sure that they did not have their hooks in an enterprise was to make sure that they went on vacation, and so that you could do things like scan and audit and whatever. Yeah, mandatory vacations are one of the ways to address vulnerabilities or risks due to lack of segregation of duties. Yep, very good one, Chris. Anything else, guys? Here's a real-world example. System audits, and I just mentioned this kind of before. Auditors are responsible to review audit logs, but what that also means is auditors, the way you design an audit account and audit access, they are incapable of modifying, deleting, or overwriting those audit logs. All they can do is review them and report on what they've reviewed. Also, auditors, I think this may be the next one. Yeah, auditors typically don't have privileged access to the systems they audit. Yes, Chris.
Here's something. Can you go back one slide?
Yep.
Here's something I can't wrap my mind around. And get some Security Plus, but when I read that, I can never wrap my mind around it.
Okay.
Don't you not want to modify, delete, or overwrite audit logs for everybody? I would want a natural system where nobody can touch that at all, rather than just auditors. Is that auditor term like specific, or is that just the context of what's going on?
It's in the context of what the auditors can and can't do, but you are correct. Audit logs, or system logs as they're also called, are supposed to be indelible. In other words, if you have an audit log, it is supposed to be a part of the record for that system. The challenge you run into is that, like in Microsoft, Exchange or Active Directory or whatever, a system administrator can delete audit logs, system logs. So what you do, when you design it that way, what you have is what's called a log server. And when a log is written locally, it's also written over to another server that Windows admin can't get to. So, there are various ways to do it, but you are correct. The person who has the most access should be the most tightly controlled when it comes to log access. And again, the auditors, all they should be allowed to do is read the logs. That's all they're there for.
I agree with that. Okay.
Yeah. That's a very good question, though, Chris. So again, auditors, for example, you shouldn't have your system admin be an auditor. Your system admin can overwrite or delete the logs. Auditors aren't supposed to, so therefore, the auditor should be someone else. Okay? And again, if you get into people who can delete their own logs, that means you should move that log to somewhere they can't delete. And at the moment it's written, not, I've heard, war stories of somebody who goes in and hits the power button on the wall to shut down all the servers because they just did something nasty. And so they can go back in and delete the log and say, oh, gee, I guess the power, drop got it or whatever. They can get really creative.
The only reason I would see to delete a log would be these logs have to create space, and space is precious. You would probably want to set a time schedule, say like after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I have to look up the guideline for that, but after that certain amount of time, you can say, okay, wipe the logs, new space, or have it rotating kind of situation.
Yeah, back in the day, you are correct. Back in the day, they used to be very concerned about logs overwriting and filling up your hard drive, which would literally crash your system. So somebody came up with the wonderful concept of what's called circular logging. It's sort of like if you have a well, this is not it, but if you've got a security system, security camera, that you have your dash cam and you want it to be recording all the time, it creates what's called a circular log, and whenever something new needs to be written, it finds the oldest and deletes it. The problem you run into with circular logs is they can be overwritten. So if you have circular logging for the purposes of space, you have to have something that writes it out somewhere to where it will not be overwritten. Log entries are supposed to be permanent parts of your system records. So yeah, those are different ways to do it. Circular logging, all sorts of wonderful, but all sorts of nasty too, because it deletes what occurred 2 weeks ago. So, yep. So here's this interesting one I wanted to bring up to everybody, and I gave you the graphic about it. It's called a break glass account, also known as an emergency access account. It's an account that's used for emergency purposes to gain access to a system or service that is not accessible under normal controls. Sounds like along the lines of, we said, well, we have Chris, who used to be the Exchange admin, but now he's moved over doing DB admin. Well, let's keep him here just in case with Exchange admin privileges. Well, the problem you run into is that you possess those privileges whether you use them or not, whether you need them or not. And yeah, you may be a good guy, but that is still subjecting the enterprise to risk. A break glass account is an account that you possess, but the moment you access it, it is highly logged. In other words, everything that you do, every keystroke, every mouse click, etc., on a break glass account is typically logged, so that if you absolutely need it, you must bring up this break glass account, do certain things with it, and then later on somebody is going to audit to make sure that what you did was right and appropriate and weren't overstepping or causing any sorts of system risk. It's called a break glass account. The reason I bring this up is break glass accounts are actually recommended by Microsoft for Azure. This is straight from Microsoft's page, I believe. Azure Active Directory, although you can have many administrators or global accounts, Microsoft recommends 2 break glass accounts for the Microsoft 365 platform. The reason being is that you'll want to back up for the backup, just for good measure. So the thing about it is, when you set up a break glass account, it should not be used. And if it is used, if somebody does decide to use it, your logging is the highest possible logging on it, because it is usually for some sort of emergency. Okay? So it's called a break glass account, and again, Microsoft has brought that back because we're now talking about cloud access. Azure is a cloud-based network operating system. So they're talking about break glass. I figured it was a good time for us to bring it back up. It is possible to have it, but again, you need to have tremendously tight controls around it, and only certain people who couldn't do the work normally are given access, the ability to log into those break glass accounts. Any questions about that? Again, it's not an account you use. The moment somebody logs into it, you know, all sorts of alarm bells go off. You don't stop it from working, but the break glass account normally has, like it said in the previous one, higher permissions than are what are normally accessed. So what if something goes wrong and people can't log in?
I see why you would want tight controls before you have the break glass account. So it sounds like you want to create your normal accounts under the structure. I'm sorry if I'm broken in my English here. Not sure how to explain it without actually reading about what goes on in design and account creation. I've always told one of my colleagues I need to take a design course. It's something that'd be cool to take. But that break glass account, its purpose is to, and I'm gonna ask this question to you, Scotty, is, hey, if everything goes awry, or if everybody's locked out, and when I say everybody's locked out, everybody is locked out.
Right.
Or something bad, really bad's happening, we can use that to say, log into the break glass account, hey, something's going on here, and I'm sure there's beams that go out to Microsoft to whoever that says, hey, somebody broke the break glass account. It's the panic button, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And my question would be, is that break glass account, does that reset everything, or does it give commands to, hey, something's happening, we need to figure something out, or?
No, a break glass account is a regular account. It's available for login, but only the minimum number of people have the ability to log into it. In other words, you share the password with only a couple people, and they agree that they will not use the break glass account unless the situation is so dire that they could not do something essential without it.
This question may be more advanced for this group. Is this a operational account, or is this an account where there's disaster recovery and business continuity issues, and you break the glass to have it work? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that depends on how you have set yourself up for continuity of operations. Most of the time, you're supposed to set it up without having the need for emergency accounts. You should have lots of time to plan before, well, like to use my example, before somebody flies an airplane into your office building. You should plan for these things and do exercises that use them. But a break glass account should be one level of emergency above that. Let's say, I don't know, we lose the entire eastern seaboard to an electrical issue. You know, like an absolute emergency, we need to fire up our West Coast VPN or something like that. That's what we're talking about. Yes, Doug.
I'm done. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I had some similar questions to. Although I'm not very acquainted with these type of things yet, but I had similar questions as Chris. And I'm also reading here that Microsoft recommends 2 break glass accounts. One thing I remember you told us is that, well, you have always talked about logs, in cybersecurity and everywhere. You always have a log. And I think I asked you this question about someone being able, an attacker or whoever, erasing the log account. Can you, is this something that could be used towards that end? For example, having access to the log, or like, for example, I've always thought, how would you be able to avoid losing your account, your log account, in case somebody, a hostile, power gets into your, or breaks into your network and, erases it or whatever. So I was thinking maybe, and I don't know if this is something that is done, we have the log account, and maybe you have another log account somewhere, or you make a backup out of it somewhere that is not accessible within the network, or maybe via using the break glass account or something like that. Is this something that it's related, or do you do it that way?
Yeah, that is the main reason why you put your logs onto a separate location, because they are so critical. And frequently, the way back in the day, 10, 15, 20 years ago, those log servers would literally write to what was known as a worm drive, which was write once, read many, WORM, and they were unable to be erased. You could not erase something that had been written to a worm drive. So that was one way of doing it, or even further than that were tape drives and those sorts of things. So there are ways to do it, but basically what they're doing now is they are, for example, you have your Microsoft servers, your schema servers, your domain controllers, whatever, and they write to a non-Microsoft log server, so that none of those Microsoft permissions have extended out to that log server. Anybody who breaks in here cannot access up here. Their privileges don't extend. So they would literally have to break in here and break in here in order to remove the evidence of them having gotten in. So you're separating your risk into 2 different places, which greatly reduces the overall risk. That's one of the ways I've seen it done.
Yeah, and even though I haven't heard about the break glass accounts, and I've thought about maybe having more than one backup, like just in case they make it to the second place where you keep your logs or something like that. Yep.
That's always a concern. Again, logs are, I will say that most of the time logs are your last point of detection. Normally something occurs as something is tripped, like a tripwire occurs at your network borders or through your firewall or something like that, and that's where it's designed to fix it. Logs could show something that occurred weeks in the past. So you don't want to rely on your logs as your primary detection. Those are just to make sure that nobody's performing any sneaky business in the background that you don't know about. That's typically what logs are for. But if you're looking for real-time detection, you don't rely on logs. Logs are not real-time.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. All right, any other questions before we go on to my next demonstration? We're going to have a fun demonstration. Cool. Okay. So, oh man. Yeah, all right. So we're going to talk about the Microsoft Safety Scanner. A lot of people may not have heard of this, but this has been around. I saw something, I did a search on it and said, what about the Microsoft, they called it Security Scanner back then, and it was dated 2012. So that means it's been around for at least 10 years. But there is this thing out there from Microsoft. And I gave Chris this scenario. If you're calling Microsoft, and by the way, it costs a lot of money to call Microsoft. If you have any sort of pop-up on your screen that says, call Microsoft at this toll-free number, they're lying to you. I remember when we had Premier support with the DoD back in the late 1990s, it was $1,500 per phone call to Microsoft. Okay? So nobody's going to give you a toll-free number where you can talk to a Microsoft engineer. Nobody at Microsoft is. They may be spoofing you and saying, oh, yes, of course, I'm Microsoft. But that is not the case. So if somebody says they're Microsoft and says to call a toll-free number, they're lying to you. It's like, is there a Google help desk? No. Is there an Amazon help desk? No. Same thing with Microsoft. They've designed their support infrastructure to be person agnostic. It's not run by people. It's run by processes and systems and knowledge bases like this. So I'm in the Microsoft documents, docs.microsoft.com, and I looked up Microsoft Safety Scanner. And here it is, 32-bit, 64-bit, and just a little bit about it. It runs all by itself. It is a standalone file that runs all by itself and writes to a system log on your computer. Okay, and I'll explain how that works in just a minute. But it works on any Microsoft product all the way back to Windows 7, to give you an idea. So it is a very easy, inexpensive, like free file that you can download and run. If somebody, if you're going to go over and support somebody and you think they may have something, here's how to do it. So I'm going to say, let's go to the 64-bit. Most operating systems these days are 64-bit. So I say download it, and it's this file called MSERT.exe. MSERT.exe. So I don't need to download it, but I think it's like 189 megabytes in size. And you should put it onto an external drive, some sort of thumb drive. And I'm bringing these all up because none of these are recommended, because none of these have write protection. So be aware that when you're doing it, and I'll use this one as an example, I'm using a micro SD card with a little slot on the side that says write protect. Okay, so you download it onto here, you write protect it, and then you can plug it into your computer. If you have one, this is a micro SD card to USB adapter, and I just plug the card in here and I can plug it into a USB port if they don't have an SD card. But I happen to have an SD card reader, so I plug it in and it pops up and says, there it is, MSERT. The important thing to remember is that this file will become obsolete every 10 days. So if you download this, you need to have downloaded it within the last, let's say, week before you use it. After that, Microsoft does not say that it's valid anymore because of all the upgraded malware signature files and that sort of thing are all included in this. So I'm going to right-click on it and let you take a look at the properties for it. Here it calls it, I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry. I've just said, I just asked if you can use this for clients as well, for customers.
Absolutely. That's what I'm recommending. Yeah. And if you remember, I said it's, it was from Microsoft Support. Look at the name of it, Microsoft Support Emergency Response Tool. That's what it was originally called. And you notice I've downloaded it to my D drive, which is my SD card. So yeah, there it is, 184 megabytes in size. So it's not that large. It's a standalone file, and it runs all by itself. So here's the important thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to double click on it, and we'll watch what happens. But it's going to pop up with the security screen that says, do you want this system to modify your computer? It's important for you to answer yes, because when you're saying, do you want it to modify your computer, Microsoft wants to write to your hard drive. So that's why it asks. It also will remove malware. So if it finds something, it's going to pull it. It's going to overwrite it or make it, non-executable or whatever. But this thing will, in one pass, make all the changes that are needed for that malware to no longer be viable on your computer. So that's why they're saying in advance, be aware, this could, stop things from running because we are stopping malware from running. All right, so I'm going to double click on it, and it's going to give a pop-up on the screen. There it is. It says, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your device? And I answer yes. You may or may not have seen that, but that's what popped up on my screen. So now I'm going to bring it back over here. I'm going to make this down here so that we have a little more space. You notice it says Microsoft Safety Scanner, so it's changed its name. It was Microsoft Support Emergency Response
Tool.
Yeah, tool. Now it's called Microsoft Safety Scanner. And in between, it used to be called Microsoft Security Scanner. So anyway, this is the license agreement where you basically say, yes, it's okay with me that this tool, if it finds something, to take action on it. And one other thing for you to remember is that because you're using this Microsoft tool for free, it's going to send logs back to Microsoft. All right, it's just part of their analytics. Now, most of you shouldn't have a concern with that, because if you use Google Chrome, that's exactly what Google Chrome does every day, all day. It sends stuff back to Google. All right, so you say accept the terms, click on next, and it says click next to scan and remove viruses, spyware, and other potentially unwanted software. And it says this is not a replacement for anti-malware, but it basically handles malware. It won't remain running on your computer. It'll run one time and then finish. So that's why it says it's not a replacement for anti-malware. All right, so I click on next. You have three options: quick scan, full scan, or customized scan. The quick scan scans the most likely files, the system files, the boot files, and does not get into data and directories, doesn't get into transitory files like temp files. It just scans system files and boot files. So let's say next, and we're going to do this. It says, okay, I'm scanning. And away it goes, and it says, the tool is scanning your computer. After this operation completes, the tool will provide you with a report of the software that was detected and removed. In other words, you don't have a choice here. If it finds something, it's removing it, or it is rendering it incapable of running. Remember, you didn't have an option to say, well, I want this to just warn me, or I want this to, give me a report or whatever. No, this is running one time, and it'll do the work. And it comes from Microsoft, so I have pretty high assurance that it's not going to be too destructive. Yes, Chris?
With this program, what defines malware?
Good question. What does Microsoft define as malware?
Mm-hmm.
That would typically be things like keyloggers. it would be things like something that has already a virus signature file for it. And the challenge you run into is, you've heard of false negatives and false positives.
Mm-hmm.
If something has a what's it called, a hash, and like an MD5 hash or checksum that matches a real piece of software that is not malware, then it could affect it here. That is very true. But it's using the same criteria, the same heuristics that the Microsoft Defender uses, that you have running all the time anyway. You should have running all the time anyway. So I'm fairly confident that this is not going to do anything that does not need to be done, for lack of a better way of saying it. So this says the scan completed successfully and no viruses, spyware, or other potentially unwanted software were detected. Click on Finish and you're done. 2 minutes. All right?
Yeah.
Douglas, go ahead.
So I'm trying to remember what you mentioned about this only checking your system files and something else.
That's the quick scan. That's the quick scan. The full scan.
You can scan your whole computer?
The full scan will do your whole computer, and it could take a couple hours.
Okay.
So that's why I say start off with a quick scan. That is where malware is more likely to be resident on your computer, in areas where it can be executed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not perfect, but it is well worth the price of nothing. Download it every 10 days and run it. This was one I downloaded, if you notice the date, was yesterday. Mm-hmm. Okay, I actually took it and did a support call yesterday with this. And I said, while we're here, why don't we just check? Ran it. 2 minutes later, it popped up and said, no viruses or malware. Great. Now I know, while I'm supporting you, that nothing weird's going to happen. Yes?
Were you able to install it? You said you had a remote consultation or something like that. How do you install it remotely, or do you have them install it themselves?
I'll show you in a second. When it's all done, you would go to what's called your system root, which for Windows 10 systems is called Windows, and then there's a directory called Debug. If you go into Debug, there is a file, MSERT.log. Okay? And I open this, and it says, we ran the scan on Saturday. This is the engine we used. This is the signature file we used, etc., etc. And the result was no infection found. If this individual has had this already run on their system, it will append the next one below it. So you'll end up having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many times you run this scan. It'll just
go ahead.
It'll append it to the bottom of the log.
Like a historical. It will show all your history.
Right.
Okay.
Now, it's important to recognize, though, that remember, on Windows 10, you are the administrator. You have the ability, watch, press the delete key, and it says, oh, well, you have to be an administrator. Well, if you remember, in Windows 10, by default, you are the administrator. So I just deleted that log file. So be aware of that. That occurs in Windows 10. It's not as good as other systems where it takes an administrator to run it, because by default in Windows 10, you are the administrator. Okay? But that's a real simple way to run it. So let me go back here. I'm going to eject this card. Okay? And this is how I did it, Doug. I wrote it to, in this case, it's a micro SD card that I put into an SD reader that has a write protect on it. That's why I didn't put it onto a thumb drive. I put it onto a card that has write protect, so that if somebody decides to get really pernicious and wants to write back to where this file came from, they can't. This file remains untouched throughout the process. You notice I had it write protected. I ran the scan, and it wrote to the system drive. It did not write back here. So I can take this and do it to multiple people without fearing that I'm going to be infecting people as a result.
Okay.
The system can't touch this file. The file runs all in memory and writes to your local drive. So this is a really secure way of doing it. A high level of confidence that you're not going to mess somebody's system up by doing it. Find a medium that allows you to do the write protect. Again, I've got this. Let's see if I can get up close. I've got this little write enable, write protect tab.
Can't
It's
going to be on.
Yeah. And it won't
I
auto.
think I've seen that.
Yeah.
I have a couple of those.
And then, you know, if they don't have a SD card reader, you get one of these little SD to USB converters and plug it into their USB port. Same thing. It's write protected in here.
Got it. Other systems are like to make such a scan, you need to not with this, but with other systems, the way I understand it is that you might need to turn off the computer and boot directly from a USB or something like that, right?
No. The problem you run into is that with Windows 10, with what's called the I think it's called TSM, the new features in Windows 11 that were available in Windows 10 but turned off, we talked about this earlier, those two features actually prohibit people from being able to go in and boot to a external media.
Got it. TPM, Insecure Boot.
TPM, right. Trusted Platform Module, I think is what that stands for. Thank you, Chris. So the challenge you're going to run into is that back in the old day, you used to be able to carry around a set of tools on a thumb drive, and Microsoft, you just go in and switch the BIOS and say, you know, boot from this guy. It's becoming harder now because they are now incorporating security controls that keep you from being able to do that easily. Okay, so it takes some work to get TPM working, and voice of experience here. BitLocker is a method that allows you to encrypt your hard drive, but it also encrypts your boot segment. So what happens is, and I did this, I was the fool. I went in and I said, well, I'm going to make a bootable USB. So I went in and I turned TPM off. And my computer said, I can't boot. And it said, enter your recovery code. I'm like, I don't have a recovery code for BitLocker. And so I had to, you know, fiddle around with it. It took me a while to where I got TPM turned back on. It's TPM and what's called UEFI. And I don't know what that stands for, but UEFI is the other part. And I almost trashed my computer. So I don't recommend you do that. I recommend you put a write protect on your little USB or micro SD and use it that way. And when it says, do you want this to write to your computer? You answer yes. And then it'll write the log file. And this has not been, the system, which could be infected, has not written back onto this. Cannot write back onto that. So that's my recommendation, how to use it. So no, you don't boot to it, but you do run it externally, write protected so that it can't be written to. Back in the day, we used to boot to it. but that's getting harder and harder, especially with Windows 11. Okay?
I see.
Cool. Anything else, guys? We finished right on time. Amazing. I had fun with this one. I pulled out all of my old thumb drives and looked at them, and sure enough, not a single one has a manual write protect on it.
Wow.
Old ones used to, but not the new ones. None of them do. Kingston, PNY, SanDisk, nope, none of them. So that's why I went back to the old standby of a micro SD card on an SD card that has the write protect. The micro doesn't. You notice there's no write protect, write enable on that little guy, but because I'm using this, it's got the write protect. So this is the best approach. Using all of the things that I have here, this is the best approach.
Might be good to buy 2 extra ones just in case they start making them without the write protect.
Yeah, true.
Like the OS SUBs.
Yep.
USBs, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the important thing to remember if you're doing this Microsoft Security Scanner or Microsoft Safety Scanner, whatever they're calling it, is that this will become obsolete after 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go download another one straight from Microsoft. But you just look it up on your search and make sure you're downloading it from, I think it's called docs.microsoft.com.
I don't remember if you mentioned this, but how do you use? Can you use this remotely on a computer, on a client's computer first?
No. No,
So
it runs on the system that you've executed it on.
You might need to have them install, or
no, they don't have to install it. Again, if you're if you're talking to your sister who's in Burbank, California or something, and you can't get there, you can ask the individual, you can send them the link that I put into our Facebook page and have them run it locally. That is not a guarantee because that file is resident on their hard drive instead of being on a separate drive, but it's at least a start.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying that okay, thanks, Chris. If you are doing support and running around, especially to a number of people, this is the way to do it.
Okay.
One file, multiple systems, write protect so it doesn't get infected itself and you end up being the Pied Piper and bring the infection to a bunch of other computers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I have at least 1 or 2 of those, but I just can't remember. But I'm going to have to start making up a little kit. A little cybersecurity kit where I keep all those things in one place so I don't have to go looking for them. They're right. Okay.
Yeah, this one seemed the easiest to download and use. Doesn't require a separate reboot, doesn't require any special formatting. It's a single file and it writes to your system drive. So
yeah. Okay. So one last thing would be I forgot.
Okay.
Anyways,
well, you can bring it up on the. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Are you still recording or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was just going to mention that I have someone interested, might be coming into next meeting. Okay.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
I sent you a text, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, when I'm lining up on these, especially when I'm going to be doing a demonstration or something, I'm focused on that. I'm not watching my phone, so I apologize.
No, I got it. No worries. No, it's okay. I've just mentioned to you that I already sent the information. That's what I wanted to say. But
okay. Sounds good.
I wasn't expecting you to respond or anything. Yeah.
All right.
Right away. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Scotty.
Have a great weekend.
Oh, one thing. Have you ever heard about Test Out?
No.
Okay.
Well, I may have, but I don't know for sure.
They provide training and labs for a whole bunch of things, IT, and one of them is cybersecurity. I just wanted to know if you knew about it. Okay.
Yep, don't know.
All right. Thanks, Scotty.
Take care, man.
Have a good one, okay?
You
Take
too.
care.